I'm Dr. Vanessa Sinclair, and this is Rendering Unconscious. My guest today is S. Alfonso Williams, an independent researcher based in Cleveland, Ohio. For more, please check out his website, THEORYANDANALYSIS.wordpress.com, and follow him on social media. Links to everything can be found in the text accompanying this episode. Rendering Unconscious is also a book. Rendering Unconscious, Psychoanalytic Perspectives, Politics, and Poetry. Available from Trapart Books, 2019. Please visit our publisher's website, www.trapart.net. You can support the podcast by visiting our Patreon, patreon.com/VANESSA23CARL. Your support is greatly appreciated. For more information, you can visit my website, drvanessasinclair.net, or the podcast website, renderingunconscious.org. So what do you want to
Awesome. We should talk about your book that will be coming out very soon.
No, it's your podcast.
I always want to share the platform so we can do a little double thing going on. So please inaugurate us with your book, your forthcoming book that will be coming out. Because I saw the cover, it features your cut-up work. It's awesome. I definitely want to know more about Scansion because you are definitely a Scansion master, cut-up master. So I definitely want to hear just a little bit, just a teeny little bit of what your book is about before it actually comes out.
Okay, but only a little bit because it's your hour. It was exciting yesterday to see on the Routledge website that the book is available for pre-order. It's called Scansion in Psychoanalysis and Art, The Cutting Creation. And basically, I wrote it in a way so that if you like the artist but don't know a lot about psychoanalysis, it's readable. And if you know about psychoanalysis but don't know about these artists, then hopefully you'll find them interesting. So I tried to kind of write it in a way that no matter which kind of direction you're coming from or why you find it interesting, you'll be able to get something out of it besides just the art or just the psychoanalysis. And I basically just looked at the concept of scansion, Lacan's concept of scansion, which is the cut, or like when he developed it to end session early, usually, but end session whenever the unconscious makes a slip or something really poignant slips out, or something that the analyst wants to mark, which usually would be a shorter session but could be a longer session. And then I realized that a lot of the artists I like kind of do this in their work, where they're like using the cut either quite literally, where they're like cutting with scissors or film editing, or even cutting their body, like body modification, or just disrupting narratives, whether it's like gender narratives and norms, or like music that's disruptive instead of like harmonious, and stuff like that. And then when I started thinking about it, I realized, like, where is this book going to start? And I started it around when Freud's time and a little before when photography started, because photography is like the first time that people could just like kind of cut out this little slice of life and like hold it in their hands and reflect on it. And I feel like being able to do that started giving us a new perspective, kind of stepping outside of ourselves a little bit. Instead of being just caught up in the flow of life, we could like take snippets out of life and like step back from them and look at them. And then I thought about how inundated Freud must have been during his time, because photography was like becoming more and more commonplace, and everybody was showing everyone pictures of like ruins and archaeology and different places in the world and different people in the world, and all of this information could start being shared much more readily than it had been able to be before, and different artworks and that sort of thing because of photography. And then I found this book called Mirrors of Memory, where that someone named Mary Bergstein actually wrote just about that exact issue, and about how
Oh, wow.
Freud was inundated with photography and how that must have impacted his perspective. So then I thought, okay, so there's something to this. Someone else has thought about this too. So that's kind of where it started. And I just wrote about artists, all these different artists that I like, all the way up until current times.
Oh, wow. That is awesome. That is awesome. I can't wait to get a copy of that and read it and go through it. I feel so bad, man. Since 2014, I've not directly been involved in the arts directly, in terms of like making art myself. And after I finished my my undergrad in art history and sociology, 2008, I was a little burnt out on art history because right after that, I was basically in the mindset of, okay, I've graduated, I have a shit ton of debt that I need to try and pay off. So like from that point on, I was focused on trying to figure out how to make that zero, which is not zero. But yeah, so in between like 2008 and 2014, I mean, I was doing art and I was reading about art, but I think at some point, I think I burned myself out a little bit, not because I was overproducing, but because I think I somehow got to the point where I didn't feel like I had anything to say. So at 2014, that was the transitional point where I was like, okay, I'm going to leave the arts alone, art, music, um, sort of that whole thing, and I'm going to make a transition into reading. I wanted to read more, so I started digging into psychoanalysis and philosophy and all that good stuff. But then I also did pick up an interest in film. I don't know how. I think they just sort of. It was probably mostly because I was going to half-price books. I don't know if they have a half-price books in Florida where you're from. I forget their reach, but half-price books is a chain. Um, I know there's a couple in Ohio, here in the Midwest. I think maybe even going east towards New York and whatnot. Um, but they're awesome. So there's one out east in, in this place called Golden Gate Plaza, basically. And they know who I am because I am a frequent regular. But man, I would just go there and just sort of call the section like monthly, sometimes multiple times during the month. And I would just see what they had browsing, just as a sort of like a side note, because I work in the library. I do place a high value on browsing because it's a good way to see things with new eyes, even if what's there hasn't really changed. So which has happened. I've gone there and most of the stuff that's there was there last time. But there may be just one thing that catches your eye, and then you pick it up, and then you read it back, or maybe you go to the table of contents and you see something that catches your eye, and you're like, okay, I'm going to make the decision to buy this. Then you go to the counter and you check out. So I would do this all the time. So I would stop at the philosophy section first, browse through, go around the corner to the next section, which would be film. I would go through, see if there's anything that caught my eye. Then after that, around the other corner to the psychology section, see what was going on in there, see what Freud books they had, Jung and all the different textbooks and all that stuff. Then, then I would round the corner again, see what's going on in the fiction section, browse through all that. Then I would jump over to the social sciences section, see what's going on there, flip back around, look at the literature section, see what they had there. Sometimes I would find some random stuff like some Bakhtin. I found a volume 1 of, I'm not sure if you're familiar with Jean-Paul Sartre's The Family Idiot 5-volume series. So that's like his magnum opus, his psychoanalytic magnum opus on Gustave Flaubert. So he performs his take across Flaubert's, basically his life, just sort of psychoanalyzing him, not from the typical way, psychoanalysis views itself. Yeah, Sartre was he was on board with psychoanalysis, but he definitely didn't see it the same way as a lot of others. So at the end of Being in Nothingness, there's a short chapter called Existential Psychoanalysis, and there he sort of goes into his views on what he sees as psychoanalysis. One of his big things was he didn't like the idea necessarily of an unconscious, that there was a part of the individual that didn't have control and could therefore sort of escape responsibility. So, because that's basically what Being in Nothingness is all about. It's about the subject dealing with certain contradictions, but at the end of those contradictions, the subject is always left with choice within this environment of freedom. I don't have no idea how I got there. But yeah, so I found the volume 1 there. I didn't buy it at the time, but I saw it there. And then after rounding that section, then towards the counter, there would be all the DVDs and the films and all that stuff. But half price books, out of all the places that I could physically buy DVDs and Blu-rays in the city, they had a dedicated international film section. So this is what I would keep coming back to more and more often, because there will be the films like the Lars von Trier films, all the Criterion collection films will be there, just all of that good stuff. And so I would just keep coming back, seeing what they had. And yeah, I think that's probably mostly how I started really getting into film. And then once I really started like getting into my psychoanalysis books, I picked up the connection to film, and sort of started buying more and more films to try and understand, what it is that they were talking about. So, yeah, 2014 was definitely that crossover year where both film and books became definitely very important. So.
I've only started getting into film recently, and that's because Carl makes films. But like before that, I was never really into film when I was younger. And then when my office in Manhattan was really close to Film Forum, which showed a lot of like old films, screened a lot of older films. So I always wanted to like go over there after work or like in between patients or something like that. But whenever I thought of it or had the time, it would never line up well with my schedule. So I didn't go as often as I wanted. But that's kind of the curse of New York, is like there's so much to do, but you're working so much to be able to pay to live there that you don't really get to do anything. I feel like. But I've been loving Mary's classes, the Freud Museum film classes, and I've started watching the Lars von Triers to prepare for the next one. Which I've seen a bunch of them already, but I'm rewatching them anyway. But I really love the Joker one, especially because I love going back to that the Man Who Laughed film, and seeing this film from like the 1920s and how like this character evolved over time. I really like taking a character and seeing how with certain characters been used in different ways over time. It's really interesting.
Yeah, man, Mary really like knocked it out the park. So I attended that one, and I attended the David Lynch one. So the Lars, I get paid this Friday. So once I get paid, then I'll drop the money so I can attend. But yeah, she really did a fantastic job analyzing the films that she brought into the session. Yeah, the Joker. So the man that left, I still haven't rewatched it, but it's on my list of things to do. Even when you watch and you see like the clips of, I forget the main character's name who plays that character.
Yeah, it's like Gwendolyn or something.
Yeah, I mean, even in the black and white, just the image of what they decided to do with the makeup and sort of the exaggeration of the mouth to really make that pop on the screen. So I was browsing through one of my film books, and they talk about how when black and white was sort of making the transition into color, how there were some people who were sort of hesitant because they didn't take color seriously, or they felt that it was actually easier to deal with because with black and white, I guess you have to be more careful about how you lay things in the aesthetic frame. So the way shadows fall, even though you're seeing things in color, perhaps like as the art director, you still have to know how those tones are going to translate once they're viewed through the camera. So a certain shade of pink against a dark shade of blue. In color, they're obviously different, and you can obviously tell the tone. But once that goes to the black and white, it's going to translate differently and give you a certain type of feeling, tone, mood, and all that stuff. So I think, there's a certain nostalgia about black and white films, and there's a certain emphasis that we now place on color and sort of like a retro novelty that we sort of project back onto black and white films. But it's black and white film is definitely not as simplistic as some may seem on the surface, because like I said, there's a lot that you have to take into consideration because certain things like color are stripped out, so you have to compensate and monitor for those things that don't necessarily appear or maybe over appear because they're being emphasized a little bit more. So
that one,
yeah.
The Man Who Laughed, is on YouTube.
Okay, yeah, okay. I'm gonna find it. I'm gonna mark it in my favorites, and I'm gonna watch it.
It's really good.
Oh my God, there's so much good stuff out there.
I know, and like Derek Hook's new podcast or whatever on YouTube.
Man,
I want to watch all of them. He's made like so many, and he's just made them during quarantine the past couple of weeks. But they're only like 20 minutes each, so.
Yeah, I watched a couple so far. Man, that was cool. So even hearing so of course my first time meeting him was at the X-Ray conference. And he was just a very, bouncy and gregarious guy, and, has a hilarious sense of humor. So seeing him now, on the YouTube channel, doing his lectures, is like a super treat because, he has a very great way of explaining things, and, just a fantastic professor across the board. So that's cool. That was very cool. But yeah, man, Joker. I'm definitely a fan of the Christopher Nolan Batman, The Dark Knight. I really, really like that film. So my paper was basically about ethics, about how ethics is it's possible, but it's not possible. it exists in this space where, because of the way human beings are constructed, and not being able to sort of not being able to inhabit another one's space. So I can't be you, you can't be me. Like I touched on it the last podcast we did. I sort of touched on possession, basically. So this is that. So the inability to stand in the place of another person, like directly at the ontological level, it places a very real restriction on how much I can empathize with another person. So what we do instead is we intervene with various forms of media. So a medium is something that comes in the place of something or more than two other things, to serve some particular purpose. And so our usage of media as entities that report news to us, to give us information about places, things, that we can't be there for ourselves. That is what our formal use of media has come to be. But in a more sort of ontological sense, we use mediums all the time. So this is where, like, Marshall McLuhan really comes in. And shout out to Andrew McLuhan. He's been fantastic just over the year that I sort of gotten to know him, and his father's work and his grandfather's work. Has been super enlightening. So for those who don't know, Marshall McLuhan is sort of famous for the phrase, "The medium is the message." But within that phrase that people may think is either simplistic or confusing, is a lot of stuff. And there's been a lot of mileage that has come out of that phrase. And so for me, what that phrase highlights is paradox and contradiction. So the way Marshall meant it, he used it in a different context over time, but the conventional understanding is that most people, when they think about a medium, they focus on the content or what is contained within the medium itself. But Marshall's emphasis was on the effects. So what happens as a result of that medium's usage, and it's what happens as a result of it being in the space of the environment that it inhabits. But so I took that, and in terms of paradox, I took that as being within the medium, it has effects, and as a result of these effects, new media are created, and this continues, ad nauseum. So there's always embedded layers of media and effects, both being the medium and the effect at the same time. So in terms of ethics, there's a whole host of problems that I have with the way that we define ethics. So one of the main problems is like the deontological aspect, or the obligatory aspect, or the duty aspect. So let's say, you're walking with a friend down the street, somebody comes, they punch them in the face, and then they just walk off. So what do you do? Now your reaction is going to probably be, to go after this person and, try and serve justice. But by law, this would be typically not allowed. So you can't do this and, go and cause harm to this person, because, what do they say? Two wrongs don't make a right. So So typically in that situation, you would call an authority to intervene, which would be the law, and then they come get this person, and then this person, is judged by the third party who was the law, according to their standards. So in this case, the law is serving as a medium between you and the conflict. But you are sort of caught in a very sort of weird place. So on one hand, you have to play the ethical side of the situation. The person who came and hit your friend is the unethical side. They are not under any type of restriction. So they're like the independent variable, scientific experiments. They can do whatever they want, and they're just there to sort of do. They just do, which is what Joker does in The Dark Knight. That's his whole role in relation to Batman. He just does, and he even says that in the film. He just does. But the ethical side is caught under a certain type of restriction. And this restriction is the point of unethicality, which is represented by the opposition. So Joker or the person that hit your friend or whatever. The moment that is crossed for the ethical side, then they become unethical. So now you've hit this sort of contradiction. How can the ethical get over the unethical without crossing that line? So if this person, can just keeps getting away with stuff, or whoever, what are you supposed to do as someone, representing ethics, to try and stop this? How do you stop this? How do you stop wars and conflicts all over the world where there is no clear good or bad? But there's authorities intervening, but sometimes these authorities have, cross relations and sort of all sorts of ties that complicate the situation. So when we start talking about duty, an obligation, at minimum, there is an obligation to respond. So if you don't respond, then this is also a response. So this is where like Sartre would come in and say, there's still a choice, even if there's not a choice, because in this context, in this environment, there's still an action that you can perform, even if it's not necessarily the one that you perform. So,
or you could even choose to not act. That's a choice too.
Yeah, that's definitely a choice. And Sartre has like a famous example where he talks about a soldier who he's with his mom and he wants to go fight off in a war. So he's sort of caught between, do I fight this war and help my country, or do I stay with my mom because she doesn't want me to go and sort of, assuage her feelings about the situation and me going off potentially being killed. So that's another, sort of ethical example that Sartre gives. I believe that's in the Existentialism is a Humanism book. It's a short little book. It's a lecture that he gave, a famous lecture. So like that's one of my main critiques of how we define ethics. Another one is, so during my conference, I think the first piece that I talked about was, epistemology's paradoxes, there is no ethical relationship. So one thing that happens during that piece is basically I start discussing how in the course of mediation of two subjects sort of assessing one another, they use data and sensory information that they receive from their environment and from the other person to sort of create a double or extra. I called it in epitwin, so stupid neologism, but it served its purpose. But basically, all of this data comes to serve the purpose of assessing what this other person is in a very abstract way. And we do this all the time. It's an everyday thing. It's why we're surprised when somebody does something that we don't necessarily expect. It's like, wow, I didn't know you were like that, or something similar. Again, that's part of the ontological factor, being that we can't be other people. We can't know them completely. So we're always in a constant state of not knowing what is going to happen in terms of their domain of autonomy and agency. So one of the things we do is over the course of time, we we talk to a person, we get to know them, we sort of try and suss through the data, consistency through lines, their personality traits, and all these things that typically don't change in the course of moving from environment to environment. But it works, but it only works to a certain degree. So, so we do this, and it becomes sort of part of a longer, elaborate process of, as we come into knowledge about our environment, about this other person, our knowledge of what it is always late to the actual event. And because we're always getting our enlightenment later than what actually happens, we again end up in sort of another weird paradox where it's sort of, we're retroactively reconfirming the autonomy and the agency that both of us have in this environment that is forming with us at the same time. So we're these anomalous agents in this environment, and we're both changing at the same time. So we're both this sort of evolving development, which again, the whole point of this entire process is to mitigate consistencies. So we want to know as much as possible all the things that are going to may be the same over time, so that we can at least be sure about something. We want to have some sort of stable foundation about ourselves and about our environment. So this could not have happened for me without the work of Marshall McLuhan, because in his he wrote an insane number of books, but two of the books that he wrote I have right here. The new edition of Understanding Media and Laws of Media, the New Science, written by both him and Eric. So Eric is Andrew's father. He passed away in 2017, I believe. But yeah, Marshall has been essential in sort of sussing out paradox and my relation to ethics that I'm articulating here.
Yeah, and I love that. Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, I love that night that the talk that you gave at the Psychology of Global Crises conference was the same night that Andrew McLuhan gave a talk. So it was like back to back, these two great talks in a row. Yeah, it was a fun night.
Yeah, definitely, man, definitely. Andrew's more of a natural than I think he sort of gets some credit for, because we're sort of similar in that we're not, we don't necessarily come from an academic background. So I just have a bachelor's. I'm 36, and I think he does not have a bachelor's, I think. So we're sort of like in this weird sort of space where we're engaging with a lot of academic oriented material, but we're not formally of that environment. But no, man, Andrew knows a shit ton of stuff, and he has been absolutely essential in sort of elaborating details to me about what Eric and Marshall wrote about and discussed, and sort of just giving me different perspectives to think about as I go on, and sort of think about it in my own way. So
Yeah, I think thinking about it in your own way is important, because I think with academia, like, even though a lot of the people we read are formally trained in academia and are professors and work in academia, I feel like more and more it's getting people to think like in a certain way. You know, everybody has to read certain thinkers. Everyone in philosophy reads the same canon of philosophers. And then it was Murakami who said, if everybody read the same books, then everybody would think the same way, you know? So I think it's really important that, I love that Andrew's trying to bring his grandfather's work outside of academia and to a more general audience. And I love that, you know, especially nowadays with the internet, we can all educate ourselves. And I feel like at least my formal education was learning a lot of things I had to learn to work inside the medical and mental health care system, like the DSM and how the hospital system works and all the pharmaceuticals that they use to give people. And I don't use any of that stuff, you know, so I had to just like learn it to get a job, to realize I don't want this job. And then get out of it, and then I could start reading what I wanted to read. So like skip that part and just read what you want to read and learn what you want to learn. And like we can watch Derek's YouTube channel and get like a Duquesne level professor education from YouTube.
Yeah, definitely.
And have conversations with these people directly at conferences and through email and podcasts and stuff like that.
Oh yeah, most definitely.
I think that formal academic track is like, that's in the olden days. We are now entering new days.
Yeah, we definitely are, especially now with COVID.
And the American uprising.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff going on here in the States. Just a whole confluence of things, you know, Black Lives Matter, trans lives, you know, police outrage, Trump in the White House, people dying from COVID, and authorities making irresponsible decisions about, you know, who's expendable and who's not expendable. There's just a lot of shit going on right now that I think, I don't know, man. So I mean, if we want to think about COVID, you know, as a medium, what was the effect? We know what the content of COVID is. COVID is a virus. It's a virus that replicates itself and causes all sorts of health problems. But one of the effects, the main effect probably of COVID, is forcing us to assess all these issues that we sort of just keep burying and keep pushing to the side, just to maintain our daily lives. So now everything that's going on now perhaps wouldn't have happened had COVID not happened. But of course, you know, with any new medium, along with effects, there's always a price, a cost that comes, you know, with the content and the effects. So there's a lot of heavy prices being paid right now. Yeah, it's very heavy times right now. Like now it seems like lynchings are coming back, and they're sort of being labeled suicides, which is inane.
So infuriating.
But it's like, I mean, I'm trying to wrap my head around this, and because I really need to go back and sort of dig into this relationship between the South and the North, and because I haven't really traveled a whole lot, especially like past, like once college happened back in 2002, I was basically broke and not really traveling. But so between then and now, I haven't really gone a lot of places. But my grandfather and his family was from the South, so there's still some relatives down in Mississippi. I think maybe Atlanta. On my grandmother's side, uh, there's some relatives actually down in Florida. I think down in Tallahassee. Tallahassee's the north part, right? Okay, yeah, Tallahassee. Um, but I haven't been down there to see them. So the only time I see them is when they come up here for an event, which is very rare. Um, but yeah, I mean this relationship that the South has had with the North, and this sort of perpetual disavowal of what it thinks are acceptable human relations, um, and this legacy with slavery, um, overt slavery, and um, and how this is sort of mediated through through law, through policy, through symbols like statues and flags. Uh, this is another property of media where the medium serves an ambiguous place because it's impossible for the medium to represent this entire sort of mass of history um, in all of its contents. But at the same time, uh, contradictorily, it does become associated with little bits. Um, so to each individual who may see that according to what they know, their own epistemology, um, certain things will trigger, um, and other things they won't think about, and then another person can come, um, and it will trigger certain things with them, and not other things. So when we think about uh, what to do with these effigies of history that are standing, around in our parks, and that are constantly in our face day to day that we don't necessarily think about. Um, we really have to take the time and really assess that um, if we're going to be aesthetically invested in identities and the way that we portray things, the way that we portray history, the way that we put certain people and cultures and whatnot on pedestals, we have to be aware of the effects of those contents. What does that mean? When we call a thing a thing, what happens when we name? When we speak, when we make utterances through language, because we take speaking and language for granted, but the act of naming, which I know Lacan talks about, in his own kind of way, but the act of naming is extremely powerful, because when you think about what happens when you cannot speak, when you can't name anything, what happens to your world? It becomes overwhelming and oppressive in a way, because like if I couldn't name any part of what this computer is, if I couldn't name any of these things around me, they just sort of become things, and that anxiety builds up in myself, because I don't know how to relate. So the relation of language to other phenomena, and the way it mediates our relation is extremely significant and important. So the way we speak about things and the way we name and label things is important.
Yeah, and like you said, how we relate to them and how they relate to one another. And with these statues, like you mentioned, I remember a couple years ago I read this paper that I can dig up, that this woman wrote about statues being put up in the USSR and how they were
Hmm.
specifically put up in certain areas for political reasons, to make sure that people knew, like, this is the power and we're watching you. And they were meant to, like, put people in their place. And in the same paper, she talked about the Confederacy and these statues in the South, and how most of them weren't put up. They weren't put up like right after the war. Of course, they lost. They were put up like in the 1920s, when people started getting the rights to vote, and when people started being able to have businesses and jobs and that sort of thing. They were then erected to, like, assert the power of, like, okay, you might be getting more liberties and freedoms, but we're still here. We're asserting ourselves.
Yeah, yeah, that's one of my sort of beefs with the law, or not the law necessarily as an institution. I mean, that's part of it, but with just sort of law in general. Law, again, sort of being used as a medium, um, it creates certain problems. So again, sort of going back to one of the points my paper was trying to emphasize is the relation of the subject to an environment. We say subject and then we say environment, but this is really an artificial split. There really is no difference between subject and environment. And it sounds like a common sense thing to say, um, but it really is complicated, because within that non-division, um, paradox is introduced. So we can think of just technology, the computer we're using now. Um, this computer was not possible um, at a certain point in time. Now that it is here, certain things had to be enabled in order for it to be present. Certain things had to happen over time. Um, so now the effect of the computer back on us is, what we're doing now. We're able to communicate from over vast distances, um, just at a snap, which is fantastic. Um,
Yeah, and the
but
conference was an example of that too. How everybody was
conferences
like
are
in a different city or all over the world talking at the same time with, like, no lag.
exactly. And even 10 years ago, maybe that would have not been possible due to certain technological impedances. But now that we are here, um, what this also means is that as we accelerate and as we continue moving forward, um, there are going to be certain unconscious contingencies that we are going to sort of retroactively create, that are going to happen in the future, that once we make up that difference epistemologically, so once we come into the understanding of what we're doing in the moment actually is, um, what we put out into our environment will happen back to us. So I know that's like a weird description of sort of like backwards and forwards time movement, but it's a real paradox that we live in, that we interact daily. So we do things, they have effects, distant effects, that will come back to us in ways we don't necessarily recognize. So the technology that we're developing now, um, we don't know 10, 20 years from now what it's going to look like. But by the time we get there, over the course of that 10, 20 years, it will have always been acting back upon us. So that's what I mean with the sort of paradoxical relationship between the subject and environment. There's no separation. We artificially separated for our own understanding, but they're always united. Now, the catch to this is that the medium has a certain degree of autonomy and agency, just like we do. but it's sort of it's tethered to our own, because we as conscious autonomous subjects, we sort of we have this ability to choose and to sort of embody like encapsulated contingency in a very specific kind of a way that, let's say, a rock in itself does not. So this computer, which we can call it a subject in itself because it inhabits a certain particularity in space, and it does things on its own that are independent of me. So it doesn't need me to do certain things. It can do certain things on its own that don't need me. But if our relationship was severed completely, it would not be able to do a number of these things. So there's a certain tethering that is necessary there. But at the same time, whether or not I am acting on this computer in this moment or not, the effect of the computer is still going to occur. So the fact that it is here, the fact that I can use it, the fact that there are computers all over the place being used for various purposes, they still need me, they still need others as subjects to sort of facilitate their engagement. So basically all I'm saying is that we can both act, but the computer needs me, but nevertheless, I'm still involved in both the computer's autonomy and agency and my own. So I'm always sort of in this picture, even if I'm not necessarily the actor being focused on at the moment. And that's very, very important to consider, especially when we think about, a lot of these environmental casualties. I think there was a spill that just happened recently, either a gas or oil spill or something. And we think, okay, well, it's just a spill. We'll get some boats out there and we'll try and clean up as much as possible. But again, these are the animals that are going to be eating these things, and the animals are engaged in the environment that in ways that we are not. So even when they perish, all of their matter is going to go back into the earth to be reconstituted, and it's going to, especially with water, all of that stuff is being, the way the ocean flows, all the currents and stuff, it's making its way elsewhere. So it's going to have effects elsewhere. So all of these spills definitely have long-term effects that we don't see, even if we have the ability to, to manufacture, fake meats and all this stuff. The materials and that we need in order to do that stuff comes from the environment. So there's no escape. Even the artificial still comes out of the natural. So so when we think about all of these environmental happenings and events, they're still, even if we're not there to actually, even if we're not there the ones making it happen, we're still implicated in the event because it's going to come back to us either way.
Yeah, we're still responsible. That reminds me of what you said in the beginning with Sartre and him not liking that people saying they're not responsible for things that are done unconsciously or things in their unconscious, because I think that's a big misconception with like mental health and people having quote unquote mental illness and this sort of thing, is like these things in the law where they say, oh, well, they were out of their mind and they're not held responsible. It's kind of gone into like popular culture as like, oh, well, I can't help it, I'm depressed, or I can't help it, I'm mentally ill, or I can't help it, I'm schizophrenic or whatever, when really like there is a responsibility still. You still do have a choice at some level. And also, it's, instead of just writing it off as someone being ill, seeing like what systemic issues are at play with the person to be causing the stressors that are bringing out these illnesses rather than just writing off someone as ill, or someone even writing themselves off as ill. Like, there's a responsibility in the person, and there's also a responsibility as people in society to be addressing these things.
Yeah, yeah, that's a very, it's very sort of tendentious relationship. So, because you are an analyst, um, and there was a part in the process, or maybe at least in the past, of trying to make the decision as to whether somebody or not is analyzable. Um, again, that's sort of the intervention of choice, not necessarily on your part, but will the subject be able um, to introduce a certain minimum of choice to be able to maintain the therapeutic relationship so that it can continue at least with some sort of continuity and progression. So for me, over time, I've sort of been across all of the things that I've been reading, between Lacan and Freud and Deleuze and Guattari, and all these folks. I've sort of come to the point where I don't really find the unconscious and contingency basically are synonymous for me, because whether we're talking about Lacan and how the unconscious is sort of in this weird space between linguistics and and I know he doesn't necessarily like sort of intersubjective. There's a weird anomalous space there where it sort of happens as an event through these signifiers, but not an actual place in the way that Freud described it. But then also the way Deleuze and Guattari sort of rejected Lacan's notion and tried to expand it in a very simplistic way, in a cybernetic framework where you have a lot of parts, independent parts, forming this sort of autonomous whole, but there's a lot of back and forth, there's a lot of reversibility, and you have these processes that can be redirected and changed to subvert larger processes. It's very strange. But between all of this, what I recognize as a through line is that the autonomous is really contingency sort of bottled within a certain context. So whether or not it's through language or an actual object or an event or a process or some type of measurement or whatever. The way contingency flows through whatever medium it happens to be using at that time to produce something unexpected or something that can't be predicted or foreseen within a certain distance, basically is the unconscious. So, so in taking this, and again, I sort of, Marshall McLuhan comes right back into it. This wouldn't be possible without his work. Expanding this into other types of events and other situations and phenomena, you start to see how the unconscious and contingency basically work together to to reinforce the paradoxes that we reproduce as subjects with the caught within subjectivity. So yeah, so that's what the unconscious is for me right now. They could change in the future. Everything that I think about and that I'm writing about it's always open. It's not closed. So that means it's always
really important.
Yeah, it's always subject to change, and tomorrow I might change my mind on a certain thing, and that's what it'll be. So,
how do you think we should deal with the unethical ethically? From what you said before, this picture came to mind that was going around the internet this morning in the UK of a Black Lives Matter protester carrying this alt-right anti-protester to medical attention. And it was such a poignant, like, powerful image. And it came to mind when you were talking about that earlier with the unethical, and like, how does the ethical like not cross the line? Because so many people were like, oh, why would you help that person? But like, you know, it was the ethical thing to do.
right. That's part of the paradox. So, I mean, just yesterday, I was thinking about how if I say that there is no ethical relation, that all of the points that I've been giving reinforce the idea that actually having a workable, either universal or particular ethics, contextual ethics, is not really possible. That our limits of subjectivity explicitly limit what is capable in terms of empathy and what I can know about the unknown. If that's true, that there is no ethical relation, then what I'm sort of reduced to is having to chase this illusion that there is. But the catch to that is that if I choose not to chase this illusion, then my world begins to fall apart. Because if I fall into the context of, okay, everybody's totally free, they can do what they want, that's sort of one dimension of anarchist thinking. For me, that falls into a different dimension of law. So I think a lot of people equate total anarchy as there being no law. But for me, that's actually not true. It's actually a different extremity of law. Because now that I'm free, I can do what I want. This person can do what they want. As soon as we engage, then there's automatic conflict. So we're right back where we started with trying to discern this ethical relation. So what really stops this process is you have to stop the process altogether. You have to hold the process up. So, for example, like with law, in order to make the law not work, you have to hold the process up. You have to stop the flow process to the point where nothing can happen. So a good example of this is like the filibuster in the process. So there's that famous film of Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, and he gives that famous filibuster where he's just going on and on to try and delay the legal process. That's how the law becomes impotent or not work. So to come back to the protester, if they were not to do that, if they were to just leave them out on the street, then again, they will be caught in the unethical. They would transcend that boundary and, you know, totally flip exactly what they're, in a sense, what they're against. So being caught within that paradox, it always seems like it's the ethical side that always ends up carrying the cost of the burden of what ethics is supposed to be. Um, so again, being the one on the defensive, even though that the offender is there, you know, accosting them, seeing that opportunity to act ethically, to make a conscious choice to not leave this person there on the street to die. They have fulfilled the ethical paradigm, but yet at the same time, that encapsulated by a larger global context of again being accosted by the unethical is not being seen as human as a Black individual. Um, you know, that is still there to be dealt with by them. So having fulfilled the act doesn't necessarily mean that there will be some sort of virtuous end at the end of that. So yeah, that's again, man, that's part of the paradox. So even though we're saying there's no ethics, if I don't chase it, then my whole world becomes chaos. So I have to chase it. I have to at least create the illusion that there is an ethics in order for there to be some foundation that I can base my principles on and to structure my world in a cohesive way. So
Yeah,
they definitely,
no,
yeah, they definitely do the right thing.
Yeah, exactly. And it's true because maybe there's no like universal ethics or like universal ethics that you can apply, but like maybe then it's up to the it's up to each individual where they want to have their ethics be, and what it's up to their decision, and it's their responsibility to make those choices. And that man clearly made a really noble choice. But that was another woman's point that commented on the photo was, we've been taking care of these assholes basically and caring for them for centuries, and it hasn't changed a thing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's how does change happen when this continuous cycle has been going on for so long. I mean, at the moment, for me at least, with the extensiveness of uprisings, not just here in the U.S. but across the world also, to me, I mean, I would really like to believe that we are sort of witnessing a transitional moment in history, sort of a parallax shift in perspective, to where we are at least acknowledging that there are people who definitely do believe that this is wrong, that Black individuals, everybody on the LGBTQ spectrum, First Nations, Native Americans, peoples, these are all valid identities. And the fact that we are even having a debate about their subjectivity should need to be happening. The fact that there are people out there voicing their opinions in the form of protest is an important support for that. And it's a very positive thing to see. So none of us know what it's going to look like at the end of this. At the end of this event, but we are all hoping that this will at least in terms of the structures that we use, because again, there is no structure without us as subjects. With this change in subjectivity, that this will also manifest through the structures that we use, and how we continually over time integrate everybody into the world environment in the way that we're talking about. So we're going to have to back up what we're saying, so that what's going on right now, the event, is not just an event for participation. It means that in the everyday, everyone is going to have to make an effort to maintain this environment that we've been talking about. So, but yeah, I've really been pleased at seeing all the events around the world, from the UK to everywhere. That's good. That's very good. I'm happy about that.
Thank you for listening to Rendering Unconscious. You've just heard a discussion with S. Alfonso Williams. For more, please visit his website, THEORYANDANALYSIS.wordpress.com, and follow him at social media. Links to everything can be found in the text accompanying this episode. Rendering Unconscious is also a book. Rendering Unconscious, Psychoanalytic Perspectives, Politics, and Poetry. Available from Trapart Books, 2019. Please visit our publisher's website, www.trapart.net. You can support the podcast by visiting our Patreon, patreon.com/VANESSA23CARL. Your support is greatly appreciated. Growing infinitely. Before she further delved into the symbolism and background, the personality, pronoun we, which is where, and feel your breath, set themselves free. Thanks. Unity via plurality. Seen is never consciously introduced. Opposites combining. You will see the tendency. Edging the is the key. Truly transformed. To shout. Gregarious form can, certain stage. To thee, provided it is animated. We are situated in this gap. This of to the client's dead, we're slowly budding, growing infinitely. Energy, you of ways, whether you are, the pair began to attract. That pause, the mirror, a new way out of samsara, reflective of Jung's archetypes. We will discuss each of these in snakes. Wisdom is the major arcana, is the key to the sessions. Life has yours, my love.
Better or for lies the lulling yet provocative. Works thank you for your collaboration, but they can also create themselves on their starring own, thus of the angels, your interpersonal relationships, messenger like a mask, your soul. Mirroring work has begun, consciousness into a more originally delineated by love to one. Eros is the burning one. Not at all. I would say it via the cutting up and have you done anything good? We are able to be. I've not done anything. But the pieces to create already know this. Tomorrow, should you don't. I can take one of those, we feel, got into the sing-song correlatives of it. That is, ever then, named, and the clients would answer. But they are affirmations, would confirm, yet they made know this eclipse period, and forth would develop a new way out of samsara. Cut-ups were used,